Hello and good evening in Switzerland. Good almost afternoon in New York City. I'm very glad to welcome you here live from New York City for our first webinar from the Swissnex outpost in New York City. I'm here with Swaminathan from the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And since it's the first event of a series of education webinar here in New York City for Swiss startup interested in entering the US market, we will give you the introduction, an overview of the New York tech and startup scene, and tell you why New York is a rising innovation ecosystem in the US with a focus on the opportunities for international startups. But before we get started, let me introduce myself. So I am Pierre Dorsa. I'm the manager of the office of Swissnex in New York. Swissnex is an initiative of the State Secretariat for Education and Research in Switzerland with the mission of connecting Switzerland and North America in the field of higher education, innovation and entrepreneurship. And together with the Commission for Technology and Innovation in Switzerland and with my colleagues both in Boston and in San Francisco, we run an accelerator program for Swiss startups looking to do business in the US. So we provide local connection to customers or to partners. We provide mentoring activities, coaching activities, and also office space in Manhattan, but also in Boston and in the Silicon Valley. So before you start, I just wanted to let you know that you can ask questions to the presenter. Usually that is feasible by using the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen in the Ustream windows, but apparently Ustream, they have a problem with the server, with the chat server. So it's not a problem. You can email me your question to this email address if you want to ask a question. So send it to pierre@swissnexboston.org. I'll give you a minute to write it down. You can put the subject line question webinar, and we'll take some time at the very end of the presentation to answer your question together with Sri. So now, without further ado, I'll give you the floor, Sri, if you want to start by introducing yourself, and then we can jump into the presentation.
Thank you, Pierre, and hello to everyone who's watching this stream. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you all through this wonderful technology here from New York City. My name is Sri Swaminathan. So today's presentation is going to have four main parts. Briefly, I'd like to start with an explanation of what the New York City Economic Development Corporation is, and then talk a little bit about why New York City can make sense for your international startup. I understand that most of the people in the audience from Switzerland have early stage companies that they may be interested in bringing to the United States, and New York is a very good destination for them. I'll then talk a little bit about the programs that the Economic Development Corporation runs that may be relevant for international entrepreneurs. And finally, we'll have about 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the presentation to do some questions and answers. So firstly, what is the New York City Economic Development Corporation? It's a very long name, but what we do is we are the official economic development agency of the City of New York. We are a quasi-governmental organisation. We have around 400 people, and we work directly for the mayor. We report through the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development and Housing. There are three main functions that our organisation has. Firstly, we develop and manage properties on behalf of the city. Many of the signature projects in New York City have been implemented with the involvement of New York City. Of our organisation, including the Highline Park and the Staten Island Ferris wheel, two of the pictures that you can see here. We also oversee capital construction with a $2 billion budget. So that means we provide financing options for large real estate projects that happen in New York City. And finally, and most relevantly for this audience, we also act as a think tank and a foundation to transform the New York City economy and ensure that New York City remains a world leader in this new technology-enabled economy going forward. So many of you may be sitting in Switzerland and wondering why New York is an appropriate destination for your company. And I just want to give you a few reasons why that's the case. Firstly, New York City offers unrivaled access to customers. New York City is a city of 8.3 million people. That's a little larger than the population of Switzerland. It's highly educated and a young population compared to the national average. Secondly, New York City offers unrivaled access to partners, large corporates who could be customers, partners, or suppliers. And we'll talk a little bit about those types of companies in a moment. Thirdly, New York offers incredible access to capital, whether that's the New York Stock Exchange, as we have pictured here, the NASDAQ, Wall Street banks, hedge funds, private equity, angel investors. New York City is a home of finance, and therefore there's a lot of capital that's available here for your companies. And finally, New York City is also a home of incredible talent. So many people don't know that New York City is actually home to the largest student population in the US, with over 500,000 students here. We have outstanding schools in engineering, business, law, medicine, fashion, design, and the humanities. And around 200 languages are spoken in New York City on a daily basis. So it's a very international talent pool. Just to give a little more detail on the customers and partners section that I just mentioned. The New York City economy, as many of you probably know, is very large and very diverse. On the left-hand side of this presentation, you can see how the New York City economy ranks against many of the largest economies in the world. So you'll see if the New York metro area, that is the greater city of New York, New Jersey, and parts of Connecticut, were a country, its economy would be the 14th largest in the world, slightly larger than the economy of Mexico. And even if you just focus on the 5 boroughs, New York City proper, the 8.3 million people I referred to earlier, its economy would be the 20th largest in the world, really similar to the economy of Switzerland again. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the main companies that have their headquarters here in New York. 42 Fortune 500 companies are based in the city, and they include financial services companies, media companies, advertising, healthcare, and fashion. And why that's relevant is that if you're a startup, your customers, especially these large customers that can really sustain a company, are just a subway ride away. And one last point that is of particular interest to an international audience. New York City has always been an incredibly international city, but these statistics bear some looking at. 37% of the population in New York City, that's over 1/3, were born overseas. And almost half of the workforce was born overseas. So it's a city that is more international than any other in the US by some margin. And it's a city where, as an international entrepreneur and an international person trying to work, you have absolutely a level playing field with everybody else. So it's a great place to do business, particularly as an international entrepreneur. Let me talk a little bit about capital. Many people who are thinking about opening businesses or expanding their business to the US are interested in raising finance here. This chart shows the number of venture capital deals in the technology space done per quarter from 2009 to 2013. The silver line on this chart represents New York. The red line represents Massachusetts. And I think this chart sort of tells a story about how New York has grown over the last 4 or 5 years as a technology hub. Back in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, there was a conscious decision made within the city to diversify the city economy away from large banks, insurance, real estate companies, and towards younger, more agile, more innovative companies that use technology to improve and disrupt many of the existing industries that have a home in New York City. Because we have such a strong pool of financing, be it venture capital or private angel investors, those young early stage companies find a ready home here in New York. And many of the policies that the city has pursued have resulted in more and more companies being funded here. So you'll see back in Q4 of 2009, there were roughly 30 companies being funded in that quarter. Fast forward to 2013, and that number has almost tripled to around 90. So that is one company getting a venture capital funded deal per day now in New York. Compare that to Massachusetts, which used to be the #2 state in the US for venture capital. That's remained fairly steady at around 40 to 50 deals per quarter. So New York has now become the clear #2 in the US behind Silicon Valley in terms of tech VC financing. If you look further into the numbers at what kind of deals are being done here in New York, a large proportion of these deals are either at the seed or Series A stage. So in this chart, the blue bars at the bottom are seed stage deals, and the red bars are Series A deals, so the first sort of major round of venture financing. You can see here that roughly 2/3 of deals are either at the seed or Series A stage. So in New York, it's a particularly good place to get early stage financing if that's the relevant segment for you. If you compare that to California, rather than 2/3 of deals being at the seed or Series A stage, it's roughly a half for them. So there is a slight advantage in New York for trying to find earlier stage financing. The other interesting thing to look at here is that the proportion of seed and Series A deals is roughly proportional. So many other jurisdictions are suffering from what's called the Series A crunch. So a lot of companies getting seed funding but not being able to get Series A funding. In New York, to date, we've largely avoided that phenomenon. And finally, let me make one more additional point about talent. I talked about the huge amount of students we currently have in New York City. But there are transformational projects being constructed as we speak that are going to make New York City an even more concentrated hub for engineering talent in particular. We call this the Applied Sciences New York City initiative, and it comprises 4 applied sciences programs. The best known, or the largest of those programs, is the Cornell NYC Tech campus that's being constructed on Roosevelt Island between Manhattan and Queens in conjunction with the Technion Institute of Israel. This is really an attempt to create a large engineering campus to rival some of those campuses found on the West Coast. It's going to have a massive economic impact on the city. Combined, if you combine all 4 expansions, Cornell NYC Tech, NYU building their Center for Urban Science and Progress, Columbia building a data science and engineering program, and Carnegie Mellon building their integrated media program here, we're talking over $30 billion of economic impact, tens of thousands of jobs, and a doubling of the engineering student population in New York City. What that means from a practical point of view is that there's going to be a huge pipeline of qualified students coming out of New York City who could feed the companies that are based here.
So sorry to interrupt you before you jump into we move to the second part of the presentation. If you missed the very beginning, as I told you at the end, Ustream, they have a problem with the server, so the chat is apparently not working. Let me just repeat that if you have questions for Sri about the first part of the presentation, or if you have question later on, please email your question to pierre@swissnexboston.org with the subject line question webinar, and we will be happy to answer the question at the very end. Okay, now let's go back to the second part of the presentation. There you go.
Thanks. So I also want to make a note of some of the startups that are already based in New York that I'm sure many of you have heard of. The tech ecosystem is large and growing, so companies like Tumblr, Foursquare, Vimeo, Artsy, Etsy, Guild Group are all based here. The interesting thing I think to look at in these companies is that by and large, they have a connection to existing large industries here in New York City. So Tumblr, Foursquare, Vimeo, and Artsy all connect into the media and advertising world that exists here. Guild Group, Rent the Runway connect to the fashion world. Bank Simple, Kickstarter, Second Market are all connected to finance. So for companies or startups that have a link to fashion, financial services, media, advertising, life sciences, it makes a lot of sense to be here in New York City, where you have that ready access to customers that I mentioned earlier. I also want to make a note about how New York City is set up. There's a great resource called the Made in New York Digital Map that's available at this web address, mappedinny.com. You can see on your screen. And it shows you visually where startups and co-working spaces and investors are located in the city. You can see a screenshot from that map below, and let me just make a few short points. What you're looking at is the island of Manhattan in the center, Queens to the right, and Brooklyn to the bottom right. And there are three main hubs currently for startups in New York City. The three red dots that you can see in the center is actually where we're sitting right now. It's the Flatiron area of Manhattan, also called Union Square. Between roughly 14th and 25th Street of Manhattan, there's a lot of startups concentrated there, including Google, including Yahoo, including Facebook, but also companies like Foursquare and Tumblr are located here. There's a second hub. You can see the red dot on the towards the bottom left of this is sort of in the Soho area in the West Village. So there's a second hub of co-working spaces and investors around there. And the third dot that you'll see towards the bottom of the map is actually in Brooklyn. That's an area called Dumbo, which is a real center for creative and design companies. You'll find a lot of architecture firms there, mobile design firms, creative firms who find a home in Brooklyn. To the right in Queens, there's not a red dot at the moment, but a lot of hardware startups and connected devices firms such as Shapeways, Kickstarter, who's connected to the whole hardware scene, have made their home in Queens. So depending on the type of business that you're doing, there are different options for you. There's a huge availability of co-working spaces all around the city at the moment. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the mappedinny.com resource can be a great starting point just to visualize where you might find yourself in New York. I'd also like to make the point that there's a very vibrant international startup community here in New York. Here are some names of companies that have international founders that have prospered here. Shapeways, I mentioned earlier, is a company originally from Netherlands that does 3D printing technologies. They're now based in Queens. Olapic, Pixable, both with Spanish founders who have come from Europe and are in the media and photography area. Takey and Innovate are both from Israel, largely in the data analytics area. ZocDoc, founder from Germany in the online healthcare area. So New York has been a home to many international companies and international founders. Like I said before, because it's such an international city, it's a natural place to locate your business, especially if you're coming from Europe, where it's one flight away. So those are a few reasons why New York City can make sense for your company. I'm happy to answer questions after the presentation on any of those points. But right now, I'd like to take the opportunity to walk through some programs and initiatives that the Economic Development Corporation runs that may be relevant to your businesses. Firstly, our organisation sponsors a range of co-working options that can help you find affordable workspace here in New York. We know that New York City real estate is, on average, quite expensive, but what a lot of people don't know is that there are a lot of co-working and incubator options that can provide very affordable workspace. The city directly supports around 12 incubators that range from media, technology, but also include fashion, green, life sciences incubators. They support over 500 companies. They've raised over $80 million in venture funding. And in addition to those 12 that the city has supported directly, there are dozens of private incubators that have emerged in the last year or two that provide affordable workspace options as well. To give you an idea of prices, a shared desk in a co-working environment can cost as little as around $400 to $450 per month. A dedicated desk may go for around $600 to $700 per month. You can find variation in those prices, both higher and lower, depending on the area for which you're looking. But those give you an idea, and those prices include access to conference rooms, printing, internet, etc. That it's really not a capital-intensive process to locate yourself in New York. The website that I mentioned here in the bottom right corner can give you more details of the workspaces that are available. Another resource that is of interest to you as you come to New York is the wide NYC Broadband Map program. What we've done here is generated a map of broadband connectivity within the city. So when you get to the stage of looking for your own office, perhaps in an existing office building, you can go to this website, nycbbmap.com, down the bottom, and look up the office that you're looking at, look up the address, and it'll tell you what level of connection of fibre access or broadband that building has. So you know before you sign the lease whether it has the connectivity that you require. For those of you out there who may have ideas but haven't yet gone down the stage of forming a company, the city runs a global new venture competition called NYC Next Idea. It's an annual competition that looks for ideas from all around the world that could succeed in New York City. It's open to students and recent graduates from around the world, from anywhere. We have hundreds of teams entering every year. We've had thousands of individuals over the last 3 or 4 years submit their ideas. We have a 3-stage judging process. We ultimately end up with 6 finalist teams who are actually invited to come to New York City for a week. We bring them here, we show them investors, co-working spaces, other entrepreneurs, and there's a final round judging that occurs in person here in New York. The winner receives prize money, they receive a co-working space for free for 6 months, and they receive publicity. Previous winners of this competition have gone on to raise significant amounts of money, to employ lots of people here in New York. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested in this competition, check out the program website, nycnextidea.com. We're currently in the process of finalising the 2014 winner. It'll open again in around September for the 2015 program. We also run a program called World to NYC, which is a program where we bring companies from around the world to New York for 3 days of programming. This is for companies that already exist and are interested in expanding to the city. In 2014, we will be focusing on 2 particular verticals. In May, we'll be running a program focused on manufacturing and hardware. And later in the year, likely in September, we'll run a program focusing on clean technology. So if any of you have companies that fit into those categories, we'll be launching this program likely in around a month or so, in mid-February, and you can find more details then. I'm happy to answer questions through my email as well. But this is an opportunity for companies in those industries to really get to know partners, investors, other entrepreneurs, and very quickly get up to speed with the New York City market. Another interesting program is called NYC Venture Fellows. This is for companies that are a little more advanced, on average between 20 and 30 employees already and looking to scale rapidly. The purpose of this program is to bring together around 25 to 30 very promising entrepreneurs from around the world. We have roughly 3/4 of those being based locally in New York City and 1/4 of them being based elsewhere, with plans to expand to New York. And the purpose of this program is to bring together this group so they can learn from each other and they can also learn from mentors. The mentors are senior people within the New York City business community who have volunteered their time. These are CEOs or senior executives at large organizations that have experience in scaling businesses and are looking to help the next generation of entrepreneurs to do the same. So this is open to international founders if they have plans to move to New York. We've had Swiss participants in the past. We've had a lot of interest from Europe. In the current 2014 program, we have participants from the UK, from Israel, from Germany. In the past, we've had companies from, as I mentioned, from Switzerland, from Spain, from the Philippines. So I'd encourage you, if you're within this band of having around 20 to 30 employees and you're growing rapidly and you're looking for advice as a founder or as a CEO on how to scale effectively, check out the nycventurefellows.org website and maybe you'll be in a position to participate in 2015. Some previous fellows that have gone through this include the founders of Warby Parker, of Code Academy, Second Market, Comixology, some quite well-known companies in New York City. Another initiative that may be of interest is the New York City Entrepreneurial Fund. This is a fund where we have around $22 million in partnership with a venture capital firm that we make available for seed or early stage investments in companies. One requirement of this program is that the company have their headquarters and be tax resident in New York City. So for those who are watching in Switzerland, you'd only be eligible if you actually locate your headquarters here. But this fund makes investments of up to $750,000 in the first round. They make investments across industries. You can see 5 investments that have been made to date here. They range from e-commerce to Zipmets, which is a local courier solution, Envision and My City Way, marketing tools. There are also separate financing solutions that are available in the food and fashion manufacturing sectors. I'm happy to take questions about those later or via email. All this is just to say is that there are a number of financing options that are available to companies who are looking to come here. In addition to this fund, which we run in conjunction with Firstmark Capital, they administer the program for us and help select the investments. There is, as I mentioned before, a huge range of financing options available from angel investors to early stage venture capital and growth stage venture capital funds. The city also runs an open data software competition called NYC Big Apps. The idea here is to encourage the application developer community to use public and private data sets to generate useful and interesting applications that people can use to make a better experience. This is a program that's run for 4 years. It has generated around 300 apps. It's opened over 1,000 data sets. It's attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors. There's been hundreds of thousands of dollars of prize money that's been awarded. Startups that have participated in this program have attracted millions of dollars of funding. So it's a terrific platform for anyone who's interested in the mobile or web app development space and is particularly interested in open data to get your name known. Last year, you can see at the prize ceremony, Mayor Bloomberg presented the winners. There's always a lot of media interest in the winners of this competition. And this competition is also being replicated in many cities around the world. It's seen as a leading model for civic competitions. So again, if you're interested in this competition, it will be launching soon, nycbigapps.com for 2014. There are certain eligibility requirements, but I'm happy to take those questions later or talk offline. In the health tech space, for those of you who may have businesses that are related to healthcare technology, we run a program called Pilot Health Tech NYC. Now, this is a program that pairs innovative startup companies with larger organizations who can act as hosts for those pilot technologies. What we do is we pair the startup with the large company to run pilots, and there's $1 million of funding that's available for up to 10 projects, so roughly around $100,000 per project. This is the second year we're running it. It was launched just last week at pilothealthtechnyc.com. I encourage you, if you're interested in this space, to look at the website. This is open to international companies. There is a requirement if you progress further down the track that you establish some operations in New York City. But given that the program is about connecting healthcare technology companies with providers, you're likely to want to do that anyway. Previous participants in this program have raised, large Series A and seed rounds. So I encourage you, if you're in this space and you're interested in trying to deploy your technology practically into the New York City environment, to consider this program. So that's an overview of some of the programs that NYC EDC runs that may be relevant. I also want to outline a few other resources that are useful for you. Firstly, the NYC EDC website. If you go to the link at the top of this page, you'll see a summary of most of the programs that I've just outlined and more details on all of them. There are many other programs that I didn't have time to mention today that may be relevant for your business. So I encourage you to take a look through there and get in touch if there are any particular programs you're interested in. Secondly, I've mentioned the RRE Ventures Guide to NYC Tech. This is a presentation that was put together by Steve Schlafman, a very active member of the investment community here in New York City. He works at RRE Ventures. It's a great primer on who are the people to know, who are the connectors, where are the workspaces, etc. in New York. Check it out. It's a great introduction to the scene. It's available at the website that I've listed in the second box here. The final thing I'd like to mention is that we have put together a two-page resource guide, which I think we'll send to you via email following this presentation. It contains details on most of the programs I've talked about just now. It also contains links to other organisations that run programs that I didn't have time to mention, and also workspaces, investors, resources for finding employees, etc. So that should be a very practical sort of FAQ style guide for you as you go down the path of considering setting up operations in New York City. So I've talked a little bit about, what is the EDC, why New York City makes sense, some of the programs that we run for international entrepreneurs. At this stage, I think we'd like to take a short break and maybe take some questions for the audience.
Yes, thank you, Sri. So we're gonna switching back to the other camera over there. And so first of all, thank you for the presentation. Now we have a few questions that we're gonna take in 1 minute. Before that, I just noted that we had a problem with the volume in the first minute of your presentation, so we probably missed the pitch about New York EDC. You wanna repeat that in 30 seconds?
Okay.
Pitch?
So the Economic Development Corporation is the official economic development arm of the City of New York. We are involved in pretty much every major project that you would have heard of in New York, from the High Line, the Staten Island Ferris wheel that's being constructed, Yankee Stadium, the Barclays Center, the World Trade Center. But in addition to real estate programs, we also have a policy arm, a think tank, and a foundation that's able to fund some of these initiatives. So we're very involved in trying to diversify the city economy away from large banks and insurance companies into a more innovative, startup-friendly environment.
Great. Thanks. So first question, it's about raising money in New York City. And just to let you know, let our viewers know, we're going to have another webinar that will be focusing only on the VC industry in New York. But let's take a first question. First, do you need to be based in New York and incorporated in New York to raise seed money, angel money, or VC money? Or is it also easy for visiting entrepreneurs from Switzerland to come to New York to talk to a VC and then to discuss a deal remotely, if I can say?
It's a good question. It's a question we get very often from international entrepreneurs. The answer is, it depends, of course. In general, investors want to be close to the people that they're putting money into. So it is much preferable if you have a presence in the United States, if you have a legal entity here, and if you have someone from your top team based in New York. Investors will like to tell you that it's not just the money that they're providing that's useful, but it's also the connections and advice that they can provide. And if you're not physically located here, you get much less of that second category. There are investors that will look at purely remote deals, but they are in the minority. Most investors who you talk to, you may be able to get an introductory conversation, but they will be more willing to give you money if you have shown that you are building a real presence here in New York. And from a legal perspective, I encourage you to get advice on what that means in terms of setting up a local entity here in the US. But I've heard from investors that does make it easier for them to invest.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question, more from maybe city policy perspective. Do you see any gentrification problem now with having more and more startup coming to New York being more appealing for international business? How do you manage to keep affordable facilities and affordable space for startup? And how do you face the issue of having the price getting higher and higher in New York? Because sometimes it's also the question we have from European startup. They say, okay, fair enough, New York is great, but how can I afford living in New York City as an entrepreneur? So you covered that point in the presentation, but is there any political incentive as well to keep, to keep the price relatively low for international young businesses?
So the point I would make, there are 2 points. Firstly, yes, affordable housing is a priority of the administration, and there are a huge amount of affordable housing units that are being built in New York. I think the target is something like 200,000 new affordable housing units to be built in the next 10 years, which is a very large number. But secondly, in terms of gentrification and rising prices, it's an interesting point that while the New York City tech scene is growing quickly, it's still a relatively small part of the city economy. So it's not a driver of higher rents or of high costs. The city economy is still, you have the large banks, you have the large insurance companies and advertisers and media companies, those Fortune 500 companies I was talking about. They are by far the largest part of the economy. So in contrast to Silicon Valley, where tech is really the number 1, 2, and 3 industry, here in New York, tech is one of a number of industries that are emerging. So I wouldn't say that entrepreneurs are gentrifying or pushing up prices by themselves. It is true that New York City is, and rents in New York City are expensive. They are roughly on a par with rents in London. Interestingly, rents in San Francisco are no cheaper than rents in New York City. But there are a lot of options. So yes, if you want to live in Manhattan, in the most expensive areas, then rents are very high. But there are a lot of options. So you can live in Brooklyn, which is very, very well connected to Manhattan by subway. You can have a commute of 20 to 30 minutes, and you get much more affordable housing in some beautiful areas of the city. So the city is very large, both in terms of population and geographically, with a lot of emphasis that's been placed over the last 15 years on public safety and parks. The city, huge areas of the city have become very attractive places to live, and that has actually increased the supply of housing that people are willing to live in. So areas of Brooklyn, areas of Queens, areas of Manhattan that people didn't want to live in 10 or 15 years ago have now become very desirable. That's actually kept prices relatively affordable. In fact, median rents have stayed static over the last 10 years or so in New York City. So it is a difficult issue, and there are many factors involved, but I wouldn't say that rising rents are the same flashpoint that they have been, for example, on the West Coast recently.
Very good, thank you. Let's take another question, maybe a broader question. So you mentioned all the initiatives in ICT, also initiatives in healthcare. You know that Switzerland is also quite strong in life sciences, biotech, and we have seen in New York in the past months also some interesting initiative for biotech companies. Do you want to comment briefly on that?
Sure. So I should mention that our team is also, I work on international programs, so I work across industries. We have industry experts who work on life sciences, fashion, financial services, clean technology, etc. So if any of you have particular questions related to a specific industry, I'm happy to refer you to the right person internally who can provide more details. But there are two particular initiatives that I'd like to highlight in the life sciences that are very, very exciting. Firstly, there's a new co-working space in Harlem called the Harlem Biospace, which provides wet lab space, so laboratory facilities at a very affordable rate for people who are looking to commercialize research that they may have brought out of a lab somewhere in an existing institution. So I'd encourage you to check out, if you're interested in that type of space. The name is Harlem Biospace, and that was announced towards the end of last year. The second initiative is a life sciences fund. It's a $100 million fund that was announced at the end of last year that is going to be made available to early stage life sciences companies here in New York City. And that's, again, hugely exciting. We find in New York we have all the ingredients for a vibrant life sciences industry. We have terrific medical schools, terrific hospitals, healthcare providers. One thing that has been missing is that sort of early stage financing layer. And now with a very large $100 million fund that's recently been announced, we expect that we're going to see a lot more activity in that space.
Okay, maybe another question about the industry.
Yes.
You mentioned biotech. Also something that is interesting and that is pretty strong in Switzerland is the finance industry, banking, insurance. There is also an interesting program in New York about incubating a financial services company.
Sure. So in the resource guide that we'll send around to you, it will have more details on these programs that we're mentioning. But I think you're referring to the FinTech Innovation Lab, Pierre. It's not directly run by our organization, but it is a program that, similar to the Pilot Health Tech program, aims to connect fintech innovators with established banks and large institutions and allow the startups an opportunity to deploy their technology within a real-life setting. So if you're interested in the program, it's called the FinTech Innovation Lab. It's an intensive in-person session held in New York City. I know that in the past, international companies have participated in that program. So if you're interested, you should definitely check out the website for more details.
Very good. Thank you very much for answering those questions. As Sri mentioned at the end of the presentation, we're going to also share with you guys a one-pager document summarizing all the initiatives that he mentioned in the presentation with useful link and much more than that. Are you on Twitter, Sri? You want to share also you are talking about social media, digital media? If
sure.
People wants to follow you, we can show you if you want to find it online, and we can show it to our viewers.
Okay. Well, I was going to say my email address. You can see here is swaminathan@nycedc.com.
Yeah, let's go back.
And my Twitter is at Sri Swaminathan, so my first name and last name. So feel free to get in touch with me any way that you would prefer. Happy to answer your questions, follow-up questions that you may have. And as I said, we'll be circulating a resource guide after this as well.
Very good. And so if you want to access all those resources, think about also joining our program at Swissnex together with CTI. It will enable you to come to New York to talk to people like Sri, to use our office space as a launchpad, and then to access all the wonderful program run by the city. So talking about contact info and Twitter, I'm going to leave you with our contact information. And I'm looking forward to the next webinar that will come up in a few weeks. We will send you the announcement probably on raising money in New York City. So more to come by email. Thank you for joining the webinar. Thank you again, Sri, for being with us today. And if you want further question, you can join me and Sri at the following contact information. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye.